There is a place in southeastern Massachusetts where the fog does not burn off by morning, where it lingers, pooling between the oaks and pitch pines, settling into the low places of the earth as though it has nowhere else to go, as though it belongs there more than the living do. If the mountains of Vermont represent a place of erasure, the swamps of Massachusetts represent a place of accumulation, where every ghost and every shadow of the last 4 centuries has gathered in one 200-square-mile patch of earth. Locals know this place by the shape it draws on a map. 3 towns forming its rough corners: Abington to the north, Rehoboth to the southwest, and Freetown to the southeast. Inside that triangle lies 200 square miles of something that resists easy description. Historians call it a region. Folklorists call it an anomaly. The Wampanoag people who lived here for 10,000 years before anyone else arrived had a name for the swamp at its center. A name that needs no translation to make the hair rise on the back of your neck. They called it Hockomock. It means, simply and terribly, the place where spirits dwell. This is the story of the Bridgewater Triangle. Not a list of strange sightings cataloged for your amusement. Not a collection of campfire stories strung together with dramatic music. This is an attempt to understand why a specific piece of American earth has accumulated over centuries such a weight of strangeness and sorrow. To ask whether certain places carry memory the way bone carries marrow, deep, invisible, and permanent. Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore. In our last journey, we stood in a place where people disappeared, where the land seemed to take and offer nothing in return. But here the story is different, because this is not a place of erasure. It is a place of memory, a place where nothing is truly gone. We begin where everything in this region begins. We begin with the swamp. Step off the maintained trail at the edge of Hockomock Swamp. Within 30 feet, the world you came from ceases to make sense. The ground beneath your boots does not behave like ground. It moves, slowly, subtly, with a reluctant shudder, as if breathing. No visible surface, no clear boundary. The Wampanoag understood this ground intimately. They knew safe paths and treacherous ones. They knew the swamp as a living thing. More than 17,000 acres. That's the scale of Hockomock. Imagine standing at its edge on an October morning. The smell hits you first, dark, rich, ancient. The scent of slow decomposition, centuries of fallen things returning to earth. Peat has a particular perfume, not quite decay, not quite earth. It's something older, the smell of time made visible. The sound of Hockomock in the early morning is of something actively alive and actively watching. Red-winged blackbirds explode from reeds. Great blue herons freeze, then lift away on prehistoric wings. Beneath birdsong, wind and cattails, and water's percussion, there's a silence so absolute it becomes its own presence. People who spend significant time in Hockomock describe the same sensation with remarkable consistency. The feeling of being observed, not threatened, not immediately, just watched, tracked, noted. The ancient, mysterious heart of Hockomock Swamp. The Wampanoag did not fear the swamp, but they respected it with a totality that modern Western culture has no equivalent for. Hockomock was not merely wetland or wildlife habitat. It was the dwelling place of Manitou spirits that inhabited the natural world. It's not as metaphor, but as literal, present, interacting beings. The boundary between the living and the ancestral dead was not a sharp wall. In Wampanoag cosmology, it was permeable. It shifted. And Hockomock, with its own shifting ground, refused to hold a stable boundary. Between water and earth, between visible and invisible, Hockomock was where that permeability was most pronounced. When European colonists arrived in southeastern Massachusetts in the early 17th century, looked at Hockomock and saw obstacle, impediment, worthless ground. They could not farm it, could not build on it, could not impose their civilization upon it. And so they did what colonizers have always done with land they cannot control. They dismissed it. They called it waste. They drew their roads around it, and their town lines past it, and tried, more or less, to pretend it wasn't there. The swamp, for its part, absorbed this judgment and gave nothing back. It remained. It persists. Today, after 4 centuries of European presence in this region, Hockomock Swamp is one of the most pristine wetland ecosystems in New England. Not because anyone protected it out of reverence, it's because it protected itself. It's because it is in some fundamental way unconquerable. The Wampanoag knew this. It built their understanding of this land on this knowledge for 10,000 years. And then, in the span of a single generation, that entire world was torn apart. Not metaphorically, literally. Village by village, family by family, in blood and fire and starvation. In one of the most devastating conflicts in North America, we cannot understand the Bridgewater Triangle without understanding what happened next. The year 1675, the Wampanoag Confederation has lived alongside English colonists in southeastern Massachusetts for 54 years. This period began since the Mayflower landed at Plymouth in 1620, marking a complex coexistence. These years are seen as either remarkable coexistence or a slow, grinding dispossession. Both things are true simultaneously. The English and Wampanoag traded, negotiated, and occasionally intermarried, building a fragile relationship. Yet they watched each other with wariness, understanding they wanted incompatible things from the same piece of earth. By 1675, the Wampanoag population had been devastated by introduced disease, killing 50 to 90% of indigenous people. The survivors watched colonial towns multiply and spread, their own land base contracting rapidly. They watched the English legal system extend its jurisdiction over native communities, feeling increasingly like occupation. And they watched their leader Metacom, known to the English as King Philip, navigate an impossible position. Metacom was a man of considerable political sophistication, attempting to work within the colonial system for years. He filed legal complaints about land encroachment, sought allies among neighboring tribes, seeking a path forward. The historical record suggests he understood how badly this was likely to go, despite his sincere negotiations. His efforts were running out of road as tensions escalated beyond peaceful resolution. The war began in the summer of 1675 in Swansea, after English colonists killed a Wampanoag man. A cycle of reprisal began that would not stop for 14 months, engulfing the region in conflict. What followed was among the most destructive conflicts, measured per capita, that North America had ever witnessed. Historian Jill Lepori, in her definitive study, documented that, by its end, the conflict had killed 3,000 English colonists. But the losses on the Wampanoag and allied native side were catastrophic beyond any comparison. Between 5,000 and 6,000 indigenous people died in the fighting. Thousands more were sold into slavery in the Caribbean. Entire communities were obliterated. Villages that had existed for generations were burned to the ground, and their inhabitants killed, scattered, or enslaved. Across southeastern Massachusetts, the war was fought with a ferocity that left marks on the landscape, physically, palpably present. Hockomock Swamp, an impenetrable wilderness the English dismissed, became during King Philip's War a place of refuge, power, and danger. Metacom used the swamp's treacherous geography as strategic cover, treating into its depths, impossible for the English to follow. The swamp that could not be conquered in peacetime could not be conquered in wartime either. It sheltered the Wampanoag resistance long after the open country had been subdued. And then, in the late summer of 1676, in a moment of betrayal whose details are almost too painful to recount, it ended. Anawan Rock sits in the town of Rehoboth, in the southwestern corner of what we now call the Bridgewater Triangle. It is a massive outcropping of puddingstone, a peculiar conglomerate rock found throughout this region. Rising 15 feet, it has a sheltered overhang, accommodating a small group seeking cover. On a night in mid-August, 1676, that shelter held the last remnant of Metacom's inner circle, including his great captain Anawan, one of the most formidable military leaders of the conflict. Metacom himself had been killed weeks earlier, on August 12th, in a swamp in Rhode Island. He was shot by a native ally of the English named John Alderman. This highlights the war's complexity, fracturing native alliances due to ancient competition and colonial pressure. After his death, Metacom's body was beheaded and quartered in the English tradition. His head was displayed on a pike at Plymouth Colony for 25 years. His wife and 9-year-old son were sold into Caribbean slavery. The war, for all practical purposes, was over. But Anawan held on at the rock that now bears his name. What happened next was documented by Captain Benjamin Church, the English commander who captured him. In Church's own memoirs published decades later, Church and a small party approached Anawan's camp under cover of darkness. By climbing down a rocky path behind the rock, a maneuver of considerable personal courage or recklessness. When they descended among the sleeping Wampanoag fighters, Anawan was awake and aware, sitting by his fire. What followed, according to Church's account, was one of the most extraordinary moments of the entire war. Anawan, recognizing the situation, simply said, in English, "Eowadam," roughly translated, "I am taken." The formality of the phrase, the dignity of it. A man who understood exactly what was happening and chose to meet it without performance, without pretense. Church and Anawan then spent the night together beside the fire. Anawan presented Church with the sacred wampum regalia of the Wampanoag leadership, the symbols of Metacom's authority, the material inheritance of a civilization, a gesture Church described as deeply moving. Historians have analyzed this as everything from genuine surrender to a final act of cultural preservation, trusting the symbols to someone who might treat them with respect. Church promised Anawan clemency. Church's account suggests he believed this promise would be honored. It was not. Anawan was executed by the colonial government shortly after his capture over Church's protests. Stand at Anawan Rock today, and the landscape around it is suburban Massachusetts. Roads, houses, the ordinary infrastructure of modern American life, pressing up against this ancient stone. But the rock itself sits in a small reservation, protected, and it has been the site of persistent reports for more than 3 centuries of something that does not fit neatly into any category. Lights, voices carrying through the night air without any discernible source, a heaviness in the atmosphere that visitors, whether they come knowing the history or not, describe in strikingly similar terms. The sense, overwhelming and specific, of grief. Whether you interpret this in terms of paranormal phenomena or in terms of the psychological reality that places of extreme historical trauma carry a kind of weight that sensitive people can perceive. The experience reported at Anawan Rock points to the same truth. Something happened here that the earth absorbed and has not released. Some events are large enough, painful enough, saturated with enough human anguish that they leave an impression on place itself. The concept has many names in many cultures. The Japanese have Kagari ritual pollution that attaches to places of death and violence. The Celts had thin places, locations where the membrane between the ordinary world and the other world had been worn translucent. These were places of accumulated time and intensity. The Wampanoag built their cosmology on the understanding that the spirit world was not separate from the physical world. It was woven through it at every point, so they would not have needed a special term. They would simply have recognized Anawan Rock for what it has been for 350 years. A place that remembers. Now, where the Taunton River reaches a quiet stretch at the southern edge of our triangle, near the town that bears its name, there is a boulder. It is roughly 11 feet long, 5 feet tall, and composed of the same gray-green chlorite schist. This schist underlies much of this region's ancient geology. At some point in the past, someone carved into its face an elaborate pattern of marks, lines, figures, geometric shapes, what appear to be faces, what might be a ship, what could be letters or numerals or symbols, depending on who is doing the looking. This is Dighton Rock, and it has been generating controversy since 1680, when the English clergyman, John Danforth, made one of the earliest recorded drawings of its markings. In the 3.5 centuries since, rock's inscriptions have been claimed as evidence for pre-Columbian Portuguese exploration, Norse settlement, Phoenician voyagers, Chinese maritime expeditions, and indigenous Wampanoag ceremonial carving. The rock has been studied by Cotton Mather, by the French Academy of Sciences, and by dedicated amateurs, who have devoted significant portions of their lives to its interpretation. The scholarly consensus that has emerged, painfully slowly and against considerable resistance from enthusiasts of various alternative theories, is that the majority of the markings are almost certainly Wampanoag in origin. Ceremonial petroglyphs made by the indigenous people of this region across an extended period of time. This conclusion is supported by the style of the markings, their relationship to similar rock art found elsewhere in southeastern New England, and by basic geological analysis of the inscription depths, suggesting they were made at different times. Some of the markings may indeed be of historical European origin. The question of Portuguese explorer Miguel Cortreal, whose initials some researchers claim to read in the stone, has never been entirely put to rest. The historical record confirms that Cortreal reached the northeast coast of North America in 1501 and was never seen again. Where he went and what he left behind remains genuinely unknown. But the most important thing about Dighton Rock is not who carved it or when. It is what the rock represents as an object in a landscape. It is a record. A document written not on paper which rots and burns, but on stone which endures. Someone, or more accurately, many someones, across many generations, stood at the edge of the Taunton River in this particular spot and felt compelled to leave a mark. To say in whatever symbolic language they commanded, I was here. Something happened here. Remember this? The river itself was the southern border of Metacom's territory. The Taunton River drainage was Wampanoag homeland, and the rock that stood at its edge was a marker of presence, of history, of meaning accumulated over generations of people who understood this landscape as the ground of their existence. When the war came, when the burning and the killing moved through this region with its terrible momentum, Dighton Rock remained. It still remains. The rock does not speak, but it insists, simply by existing, that the people who made it existed, that their connection to this land was deep enough to carve into stone. The rock was moved to a museum in the 1960s to preserve it from the elements. Today it sits in Dighton Rock State Park, the Taunton River visible through the windows. People come to see it in significant numbers, drawn by the mystery of the inscriptions, by the romance of the possibility that someone unexpected left their mark here centuries before the pilgrims arrived. The rock absorbs their attention with the same equanimity it has shown everything for thousands of years. It does not confirm or deny. It simply holds its silence, which is its own kind of eloquence. We move now into territory that requires a different kind of honesty. The phenomena we have discussed so far exist within documented history. What comes next is different. Accumulated testimony of ordinary people reporting extraordinary things, documented in police reports, newspaper accounts, and the collected folklore of a region. These reports deserve neither easy dismissal nor uncritical acceptance. They deserve respectful attention, recognizing that when hundreds of unconnected people describe similar experiences, the phenomenon of the reporting itself becomes something worth examining, regardless of conclusions. Let's step back in time to the 1970s, to southeastern Massachusetts, a region steeped in history yet also a hotbed for the unexplained. This decade saw a surge of anomalous sightings, from colossal winged creatures to mysterious lights in the night sky. April 1971. Two Attleboro Sun reporters witnessed something extraordinary, forever changing their perception of the natural world. They described a massive winged entity, with an estimated wingspan of 8 to 12 feet, far beyond any known bird. This sighting aligned with cryptozoological accounts of thunderbirds, powerful avian beings found in various indigenous traditions. The mid-70s brought more reports of giant birds across the region, solidifying a pattern of unexplained aerial phenomena. Cryptozoologist Lauren Coleman meticulously documented these events, connecting them to a broader narrative of cryptid encounters. For the Wampanoag people, such powerful avian beings are linked to the spirit world, appearing and vanishing with mystical swiftness. Then came March 23, 1979. Bridgewater police officers responded to urgent calls about an unidentified object. They observed a large, bright, unidentified object hovering silently over the town's reservoir, defying all known explanations. This wasn't just a fleeting glimpse, it was a sustained observation by multiple officers, leading to official incident reports. The official documentation solidified the event, leaving an indelible mark on the history of unexplained phenomena. The 1970s in southeastern Massachusetts remain a fascinating chapter of mysterious events. From thunderbirds to UFOs, what truly happened in this enigmatic region? The answers continue to elude us, inviting endless speculation. This reservoir sighting was not isolated. MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, holds dozens of reports from the Bridgewater Triangle spanning decades. Reports describe consistent patterns: lights moving in non-ballistic trajectories, objects hovering silently. Sightings concentrate around swamps and water sources. These patterns are difficult to attribute to simple coincidence or mass suggestion. The consistency in these reports is truly remarkable. What are we to make of this? We don't know. People have seen things in Massachusetts skies for a very long time, reporting them consistently. These reports survive debunking. The land itself holds ancient mysteries, from Hockomock to Dighton Rock petroglyphs, demanding attention. The geography of the strange and the historically traumatic overlap here. This precision demands our attention to the Bridgewater Triangle. Before we conclude, we must discuss a disquieting phenomenon of the Bridgewater Triangle. It's not enormous birds or lights in the sky, something smaller at the edge of your vision. It's gone when you turn to look. The Wampanoag call them Pukwudgies. They stand roughly 2 to 3 feet tall, gray-skinned, as described in Wampanoag oral tradition. Their features are exaggerated. Large ears, oversized noses, wide mouths. Their eyes hold an unsettling intelligence. They move with a rapidity that seems wrong for their size. In traditional lore, they are not to be trifled with. Their nature is complex. These beings are not merely monsters. They occupy a specific role in the spiritual ecology of the region. Powerful entities with their own agenda and logic, not mapping neatly onto human moral categories. They can be helpful or malicious, guiding or misleading. They resist disrespect. Pukwudgies are among the most ancient inhabitants of this land. They regard new arrivals as guests who have not distinguished themselves through their behavior. The Wampanoag tradition holds that Pukwudgies were present in this landscape before the people themselves arrived. They know the land in ways that no human being can fully know it. They know the safe paths through Hockomock and the paths that lead nowhere. They know the histories of every stone and watercourse and hollow tree, and they have watched everything that has happened in this region over centuries of colonial encounter, war, and its aftermath. Non-native encounters with Pukwudgies have been reported with consistency in the Bridgewater Triangle region. The accounts, when stripped of dramatic overlay, share certain features. The encounter is brief. The entity is clearly aware of the human presence and not concerned by it. There is no threat, but there is, in almost every account, a powerful sense of warning. Not malice, but warning. The feeling that you have entered somewhere you are permitted to be only provisionally. At the discretion of something older and more rooted than you can comprehend. Their persistence in the lore of this region tells us something important. They are figures of connection. They connect the present landscape to its indigenous past. They connect the strange to the historical. They refuse the modern tendency to separate ecology from spirituality, to treat land as a resource rather than a relationship. In a landscape where the forcible divorce of a people from their land was accomplished through one of the bloodiest conflicts in American history, the persistence of beings who embody that original relationship is not merely folklorically interesting. It is a kind of justice, a refusal to let the disconnection be total. We have traveled across this triangle now, from the floating peat of Hockomock to the blood-soaked ground around Anawan Rock, from the inscribed silence of Dighton Rock to the strange lights above the reservoir, from the enormous shadow of the Thunderbird to the small gray watchful figures at the reed's edge. We have accumulated geography and history and testimony, and now we owe ourselves the harder question. Why here? Why does this particular triangle of southeastern Massachusetts generate strangeness at this particular density, across this particular span of time? What is the relationship between the documented historical catastrophe of King Philip's War and the documented pattern of anomalous phenomena that the region has produced continuously for 3 centuries? One school of thought holds that there is no relationship. The triangle is a post hoc construction. Storytellers frame imposed on random events across a large area. UFO sightings would have happened anywhere. Large birds exist everywhere. People see strange things in dark swamps across the country. This argument has academic respectability, yet it fails to reckon with the specificity of the overlap. The geography of the anomalous and historical trauma are the same. Hockomock Swamp is at the center of both. Another school of thought, from Indigenous scholars and Wampanoag knowledge keepers, suggests the land responds. The earth has memory, like living tissue. A landscape witnessing destruction for 10,000 years carries that wound, manifesting as wrongness, a persistent sense of unresolved, unsettled energy. Acknowledgement and repair are unmet. In trauma theory, unprocessed grief, applied to place and landscape, describes this phenomenon. Experiences of great suffering leave active residue, not decaying like ordinary memories. They generate present effects because the past was never metabolized, never incorporated into a narrative for continuation. Psychologists call this intrusion, the past breaking into the present, uninvited, insisting on its own reality. The Bridgewater Triangle, viewed through this lens, is a place of national, unprocessed grief. The violence of King Philip's War was catastrophic, not only for those who died, but for the story American civilization told about itself. The founding mythology required land to be legitimately occupied, either empty, fairly purchased, or won in a just war. But the war at Hockomock was not finished. It did not resolve into the clean narrative that conquest prefers. It ended in betrayal, atrocity, and the enslavement of an entire people. The land did not absorb that ending. It held it. It holds it still. This is not to say every strange light is a direct supernatural consequence. The relationship between historical trauma and anomalous phenomena is not mechanical. It's not a simple equation. What we are talking about is more like atmosphere than physics. A quality of a place accumulated over time makes certain things possible here that are not elsewhere. The membrane between ordinary and extraordinary is thinner. Those with open attention notice things they might walk past in a place with less accumulated weight. The Bridgewater Triangle is not haunted in the Hollywood sense, not populated by theatrical ghosts. It is something more serious and more durable than that. It is a place where the past has not been allowed to become the past, where the costs of the American founding have been insufficiently reckoned with, and the land continues to assert their reality. The Wampanoag are still here. In fact, American mythology has never entirely known how to accommodate. The Mashpee Wampanoag tribe maintains its sovereignty, its cultural practices, its relationship to this land. And Hockomock Swamp, that unconquerable wetland that sheltered Metacom's resistance, is still there too. It has resisted every subsequent attempt to drain it, develop it, or render it productive by industrial civilization. Some things in this world resist the story that power prefers to tell. Some places refuse the narrative of resolution, of closure, of the past properly buried and the future safely predictable. They insist on their own truth. With the patience of stone, standing water, and very old trees, the Bridgewater Triangle insists. The mist does not burn off by morning. The ground moves underfoot in ways it should not. Strange things pass overhead. Small figures watch from the edges of sight. Mowan Rock holds its silence about what it has seen. Dighton Rock holds its inscriptions, legible and illegible simultaneously, a text that demands interpretation and defeats it in equal measure. And Hockomock Swamp breathes its ancient breath, patient and enormous, indifferent to our comfort, reminding anyone willing to stand still long enough to hear it that this land has a history longer than our occupation, a memory deeper than our records, and a relationship to strangeness that predates our capacity to explain it away. The place where spirits dwell. It always has been. The question the Bridgewater Triangle poses, for 3.5 centuries of documented American history, is not whether the spirits are there. It is whether we have the courage and the honesty and the grief to ask why. And maybe that is what lingers here more than anything else. Not the sightings, not the stories, but the weight of something that was never fully faced. A history that did not end, only settled into the ground and waited. The Bridgewater Triangle does not demand belief. It does not ask you to accept any one explanation. It simply remains quiet, watching, remembering. Thank you for being here, and for walking through this story with me on Whispered Chronicles, Echoes of Forgotten Lore. If you find yourself drawn to places like this, it's places where the past hasn't fully let go, consider subscribing and stay close. There are more echoes waiting. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.